We are exploring the strength of women in leadership, how CMC alumni lead, here during this spectacular Women's History Month. It's my pleasure to introduce the three of them before handing it over to Sherylle Tan from the Kravis Leadership Institute. First, I'll start with Claudia Raigoza, class of 14. Claudia is a CMC graduate with a BA in Government and Spanish and a Leadership Studies sequence. She's always been a student of leadership. Claudia has been an active member of the Kravis Leadership Institute, including as a student, but also as a Kravis Fellow. Her work in leadership has been featured in Women's Leadership Journeys, Stories, Research, and Novel Perspectives, and also The High Potentials Advantage, which our very own Jay Conger published, and the Journal of Leadership Studies. As a proud woman in FinTech, Claudia works with high-growth startups and Fortune 500 technology companies to commercialize best-in-class products and bring multi-million-dollar partnerships to market globally. Jessica Dang, a CMC class of 13. She's the head of customer experience at Vode Lighting LLC, which was recently acquired by LMPG Inc. Jessica Dang brings a wealth of experience from her tenure at the Walt Disney Company and ESPN. At Disney, she was instrumental in applying Disney's leadership and service methodologies across various sectors, enhancing client relationships and developing strategic solutions. Her role in product management and communication at Disney Consumer Products and Interactive Media, combined with her experience at ESPN, equipped her with a unique perspective on customer engagement. Jessica's leadership journey began at Claremont McKenna College's Kravis Leadership Institute, setting a strong foundation in leadership studies that now influences her innovative and excellence-driven approach to customer experience at Vode. Dr. Tan has been involved with Kravis Leadership Institute for quite some time and is currently the interim director of KLI. She's also an assistant professor of psychological science. Dr. Tan is the co-author of Women in Leadership, Journey Towards Equity, which was published in 2022. Dr. Tan, thank you for being here, and I'm proud to turn the program over to you. I'll come back for Q&A in about 40 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Evan, and thank you, Rebecca, and the CMC Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement for organizing this event. Appreciate it. I'd like to share a little bit about KLI before we delve in. The Kravis Leadership Institute is a premier institute for leadership research and practice at CMC. As one of the 11 research institutes, we focus on both the generation of leadership research, as well as the implementation of research evidence to inform leadership development practice. So KLI students conduct research on a number of various leadership topics, which include women in leadership. We have student-led initiatives such as KLI Leadership Learning Series and Leadership Dialogues. We also offer leadership workshops, leadership coaching, and a year-long initiative on women in leadership development. Since it is Women's History Month and International Women's Day is on Friday, March 8th, I'd like to share a little bit about what KLI does to support women in leadership at CMC. KLI is one of the founding partner institutes that facilitate the Women in Leadership Alliance, WLA. We do that with the McGrublian Center for Human Rights and the Berger Institute for Individual and Social Development. Together, we coordinate an annual Women in Leadership workshop. We just held the 15th annual workshop last month, where we invited Elizabeth Wydra, class of 98, to talk about women's leadership, equal citizenship, and reproductive justice. The workshops have been very popular over the years, and we learned from feedback from women students that they wanted more. So through KLI, I was able to design and implement a Women in Leadership Development Initiative, which is now in its third year. This is a year-long leadership development initiative that brings together a cohort of 30 women each year, and they participate in leadership training through a retreat and 4 leadership workshops, leadership coaching with professional certified leadership coaches, and leadership support networks. They are supported through their cohort as well as through their individual leadership circles. So they are in smaller leadership circles, and former fellows of the program serve as mentors as another mechanism for support. And together, this initiative helps to foster confidence, competencies, and efficacy to develop a strong leader identity, as well as build that awareness of the current issues that affect gender and leadership. So let's begin with my wonderful panelists who I've known for some time. They worked at KLI during their years at CMC, and it's so great to connect back with them. It's been about a decade since your time at CMC, and let's have a little conversation about some of the challenges or barriers you may have faced as women leaders. Who would like to start us off?
I'm happy to go first. I have the unique privilege of being at the intersection of two very male-dominated industries. So tech, financial services, about as male-dominated as it gets. And on top of that, I'm usually the youngest person in the room by about 10 years. So you talk about challenges, and it's definitely been interesting to navigate both of those things, right? But I think what's really interesting has been not only seeing some of the the things that to be true in terms of sexism existing in the workplace or male dominated industries or what have you, but on the flip side of that, seeing how supportive people within both of those cohorts are, so women as well as men. And it's been really wonderful to go to different conferences, whether they be within those industries or whether they be about women in product or women in sales or whatever it is, and everyone has kind of that same experience, and as a result they're so incredibly eager to share information. A lot of them have started their own companies, which has been really wonderful to see. I was just at an event in October here in Seattle, and one of the women said, I kept going to the same conference and I got sick and tired of being the only woman in the room. So I started this business where I support women in sales. I support, women in, I think she was in pharma or something to that effect. And that's just a really incredible anecdote of, how support kind of manifests itself within a women-oriented community or sub-community. And also, countless examples of men in those industries knowing full well, that there's still a long way to go, and sort of raising their hands and saying, okay, what can I do to to help that? How can I hire more women? How can I look for diverse skill sets? How can I remove that gender bias altogether?
Yeah, I totally agree with the allyship with our male colleagues and just having those like support groups with those that might be experiencing similar challenges. I know for me, some of the stereotypes that I've experienced, if you know me and you've seen me in person, I'm 4'10", so I'm pretty petite. I've had reactions be like, oh, wow, you're so small. Like, how young are you? And are you still in college? And how long have you been in the industry? And so just normal gender stereotyping, age stereotyping, that's definitely been like a big challenge for me, especially in a role of leadership. I've been in male-dominated industries in the past. ESPN, it's a sports giant in the entertainment industry. I've been told that I'm too assertive. I need to be more warm and fuzzy for male leadership. And that is not a great example of women in leadership. Even recently, I've been working with other leaders in my company, and we had an acquisition. LMPG is a large global brand leading lighting manufacturer, and I was put in charge to lead our customer experience team. And I've received similar challenges where the questions are, you're a young female. What do you know about the lighting industry? What's your technical knowledge? Maybe act a little bit less confident and assertive so that you can get the right answers and have the key to the right resources. But why is there gatekeeping to begin with? So that's a big challenge that I've experienced as a female leader, especially in my industry, in the lighting industry, having imposter syndrome, just not feeling like, am I right for this job? Do I have the right capabilities to do this job? And oftentimes the imposter syndrome is coming directly from you. And so it's really having that mindset shift of, I can learn it. I'm capable of learning the technical aspects, the product knowledge. It may be new to me right now, but it may not be new 6 months later. So those are the biggest challenges and barriers I've experienced around stereotypes and just really having that imposter syndrome.
Great. Thanks for sharing. I mean, so this semester I'm teaching a course on women in leadership, and we've recently been talking about stereotypes and bias and how that have created barriers for women in leadership, in particular, this concept of the double bind, which is a challenge where women feel that they're unable to be viewed as likable and capable at the same time. And that's connected with those gender stereotypes or norms that we have that tell us that women have to be caring, emotional, or less aggressive and less assertive than men. And when women behave in those ways, they seem to confirm those stereotypes, right? And so in turn, they might be perceived as weak or ineffectual leaders. So they're likable, but they're not capable and competent. But on the other hand, if women behave counter stereotypically, when they act like men, or they're much more direct or competitive, they might not be viewed as likable, but they're viewed as very competent. So because these behaviors are viewed as a little bit unfeminine, so it's like, oh, that's not how a woman should act. And so that really comes from a lot of societal judgment, and that undermines our leadership, right, as women because of these implicit biases, and creates this double bind where we're trying to be one way or another way. And it just creates a lot of difficulties for us, right? And so as a woman leader, you talk about these stereotypes. How do you overcome these things? What strategies or what have you done that might help you and others work through these particular situations?
I think Jessica alluded to this, but in my experience, I have kept educating myself on whatever it is, whether it be a product, whether it be a process, whether it be a company, especially being in a commercial function like I am, where you not only have to have on that sales hat, you have to have on that engineering hat, you have to have on the marketing hat, and all of these different things. So I found that to be really helpful, and also just keep showing up. Like, I'm sorry that I'm not the person that you want to deal with, right? I'm sorry that you think that because I'm quote unquote selling to you that you should be talking to a male VP or whatever, sort of quote unquote more effective leader, right? Whether that be a position or, a title or what have you. It's going to be me, right? I'm going to be the subject matter expert. And, eventually I think I've seen that kind of that managing up, whether it be internally or externally, when you're talking about clients or partners or what have you, starts to sort of take effect. But it's definitely not easy. I think Jessica's example probably resonates with everyone here. I know I was having a sales conversation, and my manager said, well, you're pushy. And I said, really, if I were a man, I'd be tenacious. And it just completely went over his head. And he was just kind of like, okay, sure, whatever. I'm going to keep calling you pushy or bossy or, whatever it is, right? But at some point, you kind of just need to sit with it and, keep going, right? To change that pushy into tenacious or whatever, the more appropriate leadership term might actually be.
And just because someone calls you pushy doesn't mean that's true, right? That's their perspective. I know for me, some of the strategies that I've used to navigate these challenges or just to overcome them is trusting your gut and being authentic and knowing that like you're doing your best and you just own yourself. And like Claudia mentioned, upskilling your technical knowledge and having that continuous learning and self-improvement. For me, it's spending a lot of time understanding what are my strengths and weaknesses, what are my natural tendencies, and then figuring out what my blind spots are so that I can be prepared for when I do have those blind spots that might maybe confirm a stereotype. I know, I don't know if people are familiar with Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder, but I'm an extroverted feeler. So if you know anything about feelers, you can come across touchy-feely or too emotional. And so a way to overcome that for me is really being more mindful about how can I be more data-driven, more logic-focused. And that's a blind spot that I know I have both in my personal and professional life. So it's just being very aware and mindful of what my limitations or lack of capabilities might be, so that I can become more confident and assertive in those areas that might come across as a weakness for me. But like all things in life, you can always improve and shift and adapt and improve over and over and over again.
That's great. That's really great. I think, a lot of what you're talking about has to do with growth mindset and that idea of upscaling your growth, lifelong learning, and really being open to learning about things and improving your awareness and self-awareness is a lot of what you're talking about. And I feel like that's such a necessity, not just for women, but for everyone, but especially for women in those particular types of settings. In terms of authority as leaders, do you face resistance to people seeing you as authority figures in those you manage or work with? And how do you encourage those people to better follow you?
I can jump in on this one. Certainly, especially if they're not used to your work ethics or your capabilities. The resistance, what I find is, okay, it's a challenge for me to show them what I can provide value or how I can help them. And it's really just standing by, doing what I say I'm going to do, making sure that I help them with wherever they need help, whatever, if there's like a deadline or support that I can give them, that I actually stand by what I tell them I will do. So oftentimes for me, it's just being reliable and responsible and gaining out allies within different departments. So if I am getting resistance to my authority, how can I get support and allies in those departments to get buy-in and ownership on whatever vision or strategy that we have? And oftentimes we have the same goal. So it's really just getting on the same page and speaking the same language. Going back to Myers-Briggs or just like personality types, there's often misunderstandings just because of how someone processes information or how they make a decision. So when you come to the same page and have the same goal in mind, and you're really there just, again, authentically trying to do the right thing and help someone else out. For me, my purpose in life is to help others. That's something that's always driven me in life and what my core motivator is. So when I stand by that over time, that resistance turns into trust. And it's always just being the first one to offer that trust. Because while it might be difficult to say, well, this person is not friendly or undermining me, it's very easy to want to not offer them help or to work with them. But oftentimes what is more successful in my experience is, well, let's shift a little bit and say, how can I help you? And build trust that way.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And one thing that I found is we were put at such an advantage being leadership, not to like plug KLI, but I'm going to plug KLI, to be leadership students, at such a young age and get kind of those fundamentals in place that people don't get until they go to business school or until, they actually have to lead a team of 5, 10, 20, right? And so I would say it's actually less so about being a woman in a leadership position, and it's the basics of being a leader, right? And just knowing principles like the importance of self-awareness, the importance of understanding your leadership style, to Jessica's point, right? Understanding what your strengths are, your weaknesses, and how to sort of solve for those first, and then deal with some of the, call it, unique problems that you have to face, right, as a woman or as a younger person on a team, and tackling those things kind of from the ground up. Another thing I think this question made me think of was how do you deal with people who undermine your authority, right? And try to go around, whether it be to someone else on the team or someone superior. And one thing that I have found has been really helpful is over communicating with my team and with my superiors as to why we're doing something, right? It's not Claudia's great idea. It's the series of, logic and data driven, decision making that got us to this point. I'm not trying to keep you from, your grand idea that you think is going to save the money, millions, or save the company millions of dollars, excuse me. It's, here are the logical steps that we took to get there, and go ahead and talk to, half the team, half the company. They're all going to agree because we came to that consensus, or, we've sort of already shopped around that decision, and, there's really very little you can do about it. It's not a you versus me, open question.
Yeah, that's some great advice there. You talk about KLI, the leadership study sequence. Both of you were a part of the leadership study sequence, which is basically like a minor at CMC. We don't have minors, but we have sequences. So the academic study of leadership, both of you also did research at KLI. So you had some ideas about what leadership meant and your own ideas of how you wanted to lead. Were there anything else that you wish you would have known before stepping into your leadership positions?
I can take that one. A couple of things. So the first is, I think Jessica and I know each other well, and, I would call us ambitious in the most positive sense of the word, which when you're talking about women leaders sometimes is, not a great thing, right? But, we shared our goals, we shared the things that we wanted to do. And, you kind of have this idea of, I'm going to make director, VP, whatever it is by a certain age, or, I'm going to work in this particular role and, get to this particular point. And one thing that I've learned is a lot of the challenges that come with getting into those positions of leadership are far, more than you could have ever imagined. And a lot of the challenges that you've had getting up to that point don't just magically disappear because now you're in a position of leadership. And so how do you, sort of, as we talked about earlier, continuously educate yourself on, I would say, both, what it takes to be a director, a VP, or whatever, what it takes to lead your specific team, and those specific people. Because I think that, the complexities of leadership really lie in the people. Yes, problems, can be complex. Sending people to the moon, takes, complex calculations or what have you, but it also takes, the adequate, or I should say the adequate people, the adequate, fundamentals of, creating that actual team, and, assembling that team. So I would say it's far more complex than I could have ever imagined. And a lot of, those things are oriented and very much rooted in, psychology and, in people management, and in leadership fundamentals. And then the other thing I would say is, there are a million and one ways to solve a problem. And if you have a team, let them explore those millions of ways, right? Don't get bogged down by whatever it is that you think is the best way to do something, or whatever your superiors think is the best way to do something. Constantly, churn things out and figure out, how to get to a solution, and, don't get so bogged down by what that solution actually is, but rather the fact that the problem is solved.
I totally agree with that. It really is about people at the end of the day. And just because you're in a leadership role does not mean you have all the answers or the right answer. You can have the wrong answer. And so I think some of the things that I wish I had known before stepping into a leadership role is, one, you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be the subject matter expert. I think there was a lot of self-imposed pressure to know everything and have all the answers. And when team members come to you to know what the answers are. So it's okay to not know the answers. It's okay to not be the subject matter expert. And it's certainly okay to ask for help and to get answers elsewhere. The importance of boundaries. Just because you're in a leadership position doesn't mean that you have to give up your breakfast, lunch, or dinners. So I know when I first started in my leadership role, I was taking calls at 7 a.m. I was not having lunch. And it wasn't until something hit me that was like, wait, is this expected of me, or am I just doing this because I think it's what's expected? And so I wish I had known before stepping into a leadership role that you actually set boundaries for other people. So you have to communicate what those boundaries are and be willing to stand by what you find is work-life balance, not what you expect other people think that to be.
That's a great one. And I hope if we have any young alumni on the phone, I would love for you to remember Jessica's words forever and ever.
Yes.
Absolutely. The importance of boundaries is great. I think boundaries stems a lot of different issues as it comes for, especially for women, right? As women leaders in terms of work and family, but that also is also pertinent to men as well, and anyone of any gender. But I think also boundaries in terms of life and in terms of the different parts of your life, family, friends, just being able to have all those different pieces. So we've talked earlier a little bit about some of the barriers, the issues that you stereotypes, and you talked a little bit about the importance of like growth mindset and learning and being self-aware. And we know that with regards to improving gender equity within leadership, it's not about changing or fixing women, right? It's rather looking at the systems and structures in place and how we think about leadership and who can be a leader. And so when we think about how we can make things more equitable, it involves everyone, right? Individuals, organizations, and society. Oftentimes we just think, okay, women need this kind of development. Women need this in order to become better leaders. On the flip side, what do you wish men knew about your role as a women leader, or what should they know to help support and be advocates and allies for women leaders?
So I had this conversation with my incredible and very supportive partner, who I believe is on the call now, last night. And he said something that, reminded me of an event that I went to. And it was something to the effect of, women are phenomenal multitaskers. If you need things done, go hire a mom, go hire someone who is juggling children, a household, a full-fledged career, sometimes in education at the same time. And a lot of the times they make it look easy, right? There are movies about this. I think it's a Sarah Jessica Parker movie of like, I don't know how she does it. I think what would be helpful for men to know is that just because women are doing everything doesn't necessarily mean that they have the capacity to do everything, or that they should be doing everything, right? There's a lot of research as to how women's brains are wired, in terms of, we see clutter and it gives us a full-fledged to-do list, right? Whereas men can walk by clutter and they're kind of like, okay, well, some socks, I'll get to them, later, I'll fold them later. But I have had the experience and, have read a good deal about that in terms of, just kind of those fundamental differences, or socialization, right? Being able to, have a very specific relationship in terms of, with your clients at work, or, within your families, to your point earlier, Sherylle. And so I would say, just because that's the way that we're wired, and just because, we're doing 100 things in a 24-hour period, doesn't necessarily mean that that's working, right? And you see that a lot in, the burnout and, in the need for women to take breaks in their careers to, raise children. And that's not that they're not working. It's just that they're, refocusing on different types of work. And, Sherylle, I know you and I did a great deal of, work on, is it the women's, sort of kaleidoscope, in terms of how they reprioritize through that process.
Claudia, you made me think of something called like the mental load.
Yes.
So yeah, like women tend to have a bigger mental load that it's not obvious to the outsider. And so they carry a lot of that, especially women that are caretakers or mothers. And that there's a big mental load that just because they seemingly can do everything doesn't mean that they should or can. And I totally agree with that. I think just having awareness, right? This is why we have these types of panels and why there's so much effort around this, is just having that level of awareness and recognition of bias, so that men, if they are in leadership roles or positions of influence, that they can recognize when there is bias happening, or they can provide more inclusive work environments, or be aware of when there's bias towards project assignments, or anything related to just gender stereotypes. So I think just having awareness, and also, in a way, it's like they're kind of lucky. They don't have to think about, is my hair styled well enough? And does this makeup make me look unprofessional? And how's, is this dress too short? So there's a lot of things where women, just because of how we look and just our natural bodies, we have to spend more energy thinking, is this appropriate? Is this professional? How does this come across? And does this, undermine my authority? And that's extra energy that most times men don't have to think about.
Yeah, for the men on the phone or on the invite, I doubt you've ever had a colleague say, "Oh, you look terrible because you didn't put eyeliner on that morning." Are you sick? Is something wrong?
I just didn't wear makeup today.
Didn't wear makeup.
Yes. The number of times I've been told, "Oh, you look tired today." I was like, "Oh, well, thank you."
I am.
Right. I am tired. But yeah, that idea of the mental load and just the different, how we divide work is often very gendered sometimes. Even in the workplace, you'll find that there's gendered work in terms of who's going to plan these team bonding events. That usually falls into women. And oftentimes those are activities that are not considered when you are going up for promotion or on your evaluation, but those kind of things fall under more, because women are about community, they're about bringing people together or caring for others. So you see that also in the workplace. And so there's also that additional mental load within the workplace, not just outside within the home as well. So we're seeing all these things.
Yeah, and I actually have an example of that where so the company that I'm at right now was acquired back in May, and I was part of the leadership team that was really spearheading through this acquisition. And I was asked by the CEO to help coordinate all of the planning and strategy and meetings and really getting us across the finish line to actually sell the company. And because I did all of the coordination and presentations and all of that, somehow there was a reputation, or that I was presented as, not that there's anything wrong with an executive assistant, but somehow I was presented as, oh, she's just an executive assistant. She's just helping because she's doing the coordination or the presentations or making sure that the attendees have catered breakfast and lunch, because these are 3-day planning sessions. And it's definitely not a good feeling to know that you're leading and spearheading these large initiatives in a leadership capacity, but because of natural gender bias and stereotypes, you come across as, oh, you're just an assistant.
Right. Yeah. We take on those other duties, right, for a moment.
Yep. Yeah.
I know we're starting to come into time for Q&A, but as we come into our final words, maybe some final words on what strategies or what helped you to navigate the workplace as a woman. What are some final words you might have?
Definitely.
Yeah. So, go ahead, Jess. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think for sure, just what you hear on a plane, right? Put your mask on first before helping others. So in order to be a good leader, you really have to be making sure that your health and well-being is in a positive place so that you can lead from a place of genuine wellness. I have found that when I'm not my best self, I'm not a good leader. So it's really making sure that I'm taking the time to take care of myself. And that, to me, that sounds like exercising every day, drinking enough water, getting enough sleep at night, and maintaining those strong boundaries so that I actually have my daily lunch. And that is something that I stand by so strongly. I actually have my lunch hour blocked off every day, so nobody can schedule time during my lunch.
Love it. So I actually saw something yesterday that really resonated with this question. And I think a reporter or a journalist asked Serena Williams how she feels about being referred to as one of the greatest female athletes of all time. She's like, actually, I prefer one of the greatest athletes of all time, right? We don't think about her as being, in a specific gendered role. She has broken records. She has, very much shown who she is, what she does, what she's capable of. And I think we need to do a bit more of that. And so I myself have, stopped thinking of myself as, a woman in sales, and therefore I can only, get to a certain point because I am lacking, some portion of, the communication style that a man in sales has, or, women in tech who, can't get to this particular level because I don't have, the engineering degree or the engineering background or what have you that a male counterpart has. It's like, no, these are my limitations. These are my strengths. That's it, right? Regardless of that gender piece of it. And then the other thing that comes to mind is, very much owning a lot of that quote unquote feminine energy and applying that to leadership. I had a female boss who said, you know what, honey, you catch more flies with honey. And what she was referring to was, just because someone's yelling at you, and at the time it just so happened to be a male counterpart who, was yelling and screaming about a particular deadline or what have you, just because that's happening doesn't mean that you need to lose sight of who you are, just because you need to match that, particular energy. If you are a, courteous person, if you enjoy, baking cookies and bringing them to the office, by all means, right? That's not the problem. To our earlier conversation, that the problem is when those things are, imposed on you or perceived a certain way, but you can still be yourself. You can still have your own values. You can still be true to those things, even if they're, considered quote unquote, a bit more, feminine. And the last thing I'll say is really just not taking things personally. I think everyone comes to work with their preconceived notions of what a workplace is supposed to be like, right? Especially if you've moved companies or whatever it is, or, with a bad day or a child who was, sick and up all night, and maybe you're a little, testier. And so I think as a leader, both working with, my own team, as well as external people or whatever it is, not taking, commentary or tones or, bad days personally.
Well, thank you. Well, Evan is going to lead us through some question and answer, so I'm going to bring him in on this.
Thank you very much. Thanks all three of you for your time today. All right, so we have an active chat right now, and I'll be pulling some questions from there. You can also virtually raise your hand and ask the question directly. So let's just start with maybe a little bit of focus on CMC before I let the questions build up. What are some of the lessons from your leadership sequence? And how have you carried those lessons or the things you learned at Claremont McKenna in general with you into the leader that you are now?
I think Claudia kind of touched on this, but definitely just having self-awareness. All those assessments that we did in the leadership studies sequence, all the workshops that were provided, just getting that level of self-awareness around strengths, weaknesses, that I think that's something that to this day, I'm still learning more and more about myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that I use my leadership study sequence day in and day out in my personal life, in my corporate life. It is the most applicable piece, and for the self-awareness bit, for some of the just interests in how to be a better leader, right? Staying up to date with those things and having them feel very natural. Like I don't feel like I'm necessarily researching how to be a better leader per se, but those things really resonate, and I think it's because of that foundation through KLI and the leadership study sequence. 1,000%. I always joke that if I were to ever win an Oscar, I would thank my parents, grandparents, KLI, and CMC in that order, I think.
Fantastic. One more question I'll pull from the chat, and then I'll go to Greg, who raised his hand. Someone commented earlier, it might have been privately, about the Me Too movement and how that has changed either corporate culture or interactions in general. What can you say about pre and post Me Too and kind of how that impacted either gender stereotypes or relationships in the office?
That's a great question. I would say that people in general are just a bit more self-aware in terms of, how they're bringing their best self to different interactions. And I would say that's both from the standpoint of, the Me Too movement and, men being very cognizant of, oh, how, what sorts of things are appropriate to say versus inappropriate to say, but, also within the same gender, right? And understanding that certain topics might be, inappropriate, or certain interactions, right, might be perceived a certain way. And I would say that in some of the conversations that I've had, with friends, and it could be a result of, us getting older and wiser and what have you, but I definitely have seen, a positivity in terms of being able to take on different types of mentors, for example, and not there be, this kind of old previously conceived notion that we saw a couple decades ago in terms of like, oh, well, what are you going to learn from, a male mentor, right? You should go get a female mentor, or vice versa, right? And so I would say it's made things more inclusive, but we certainly have a long way to go.
I think
Sherylle or Jessica?
I think it does. It has, we have seen some differences. One issue that has arisen out of the Me Too movement is we've seen less men willing to mentor women, especially younger women, because of fear of what has happened and any kind of backlash out of that. So that's been something that we've seen in terms of the research and whatnot, showing some of that. And we know that women need mentors of all kinds, and typically men hold a little more power, especially they're in the C-suite in different areas. And so we still need men to mentor women and women to mentor men and vice versa, and mentoring in many different ranges. So that it was a little unfortunate backlash to the Me Too movement there.
All right, Greg, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
All right, well, first of all, thank you. I feel like I'm back at CMC. I'm just soaking this up. So I really just love the questions and the discussion. It's really valuable for me. I'm thinking about it in terms of how could I help emerging women leaders and emerging change makers? And first of all, I can relate, as I was hearing about don't take anything personally, Claudia. I kind of recently read the 4 agreements, and it's one of the agreements, and I just, wow, I need to work on that. But I was kind of, the journey you all took me on was, I was thinking, you know, maybe it would be helpful for an emerging leader to be clear and transparent about the challenges and don't assume that others really know if you're suffering. But then it took me to the double bind of like, well, are you going to be vulnerable? Or are you going to be direct? And maybe it would be helpful to just kind of be confident, because I think people respond to that generally. But it took me to the double bind again. And so I'm kind of trying to, and so I'm just curious. I was on a webinar earlier about generative leadership, and they really said human first. Sometimes we go right to solving, we go right to the process or the strategy. We have to think about human beings and in relationship and in conversation. And that took me to things like character and having the courage to kind of speak up, sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in a meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out and see if that, resonates with you, if you have any thoughts on kind of the double bind and how to move forward.
Well, absolutely. I mean, leadership definitely is about relationships and building relationships. I mean, that's a huge piece of it. We talk about different leadership skills, communication, active listening, influence. It's all about building a trust. Jessica mentioned trust earlier, and building relationship with others. And so there needs to be many of those behaviors that require some caring, actually wanting to understand and learn about the person. And sometimes those connotate kind of these feminine traits. And but those are also very important. So I think, it's really finding what works for each individual in terms of how they create those relationships and build that trust among each other.
And I certainly understand kind of the challenge of, do I share vulnerably the challenges that I'm experiencing, or do I have the fake it till you make it approach, right? I think there's a risk to either one. And I have found in my personal experience that it's a fine line that you walk between. The fake it till you make it approach is good initially. However, you can't always fake it when it comes down to like real technical information or getting buy-in across different departments. And so that's where it's really important to build those relationships and to be able to coordinate and get allies in different departments. And really nobody knows to help you unless you raise your hand to ask for help. And so that's where the vulnerability comes into play, where you're courageous enough to say, hey, I don't know it all, but I'm curious enough to find out.
Yeah. And I would say, Greg, to your sort of initial question on, how do you support some of those younger leaders and kind of offer your mentorship? I would say, definitely that human first aspect, and, just do it, right? Make yourself available, let them know. If I think to my mentors, Sherylle, of course, being one of them, and specifically my male mentors, the common thread is that I know I can call them. And that has taken some time to build, sure. But it's that constant, right? And the reliability of, hey, you need something, right? Something's wrong. We can talk about it. And, you won't be met with judgment. You won't be met with criticism, right? It's really just you and me having a conversation, gender agnostic. But, definitely if we're talking about mentoring young women, letting them know that they're doing a good job and how can you better support them. And I know it's difficult not being in the office, right? Once upon a time, we could say, hey, do you want to go grab a coffee? Or, hey, let's go grab a conference room. But, maybe having office hours or, letting them know, hey, I try to, kind of wrap up my day at this time. If you ever just need 15 minutes, I can call you on my drive home or whatever it is.
You. Alice Krugman asks, what is your strategy for navigating imposter syndrome, particularly in a new role or industry? Relatedly, how do you demonstrate to teammates that you're a strong leader while avoiding burnout in a new role?
I think that's a really good question. For me, I just go back to self-care and having compassion for yourself, practicing self-compassion and being kind to yourself. It's okay to not know something and know that you were given that role because you are capable, and they selected you to be in that position because they saw in you that you could do this job. So it's really believing in yourself, but also being kind and compassionate to yourself. And imposter syndrome is something that everyone, not everyone, but mostly everyone experiences. So it's a really just normalizing that feeling and knowing that it's okay to feel imposter syndrome, and having that growth mindset that you don't know it right now, but you're gonna learn it. You're going to take the steps to really understand what the gaps are and then filling those gaps. So it's just, again, it goes back to that growth mindset and really just practicing compassion and being kind to yourself. And how do you demonstrate to your teammates that you're a strong leader? I think a lot of it too is, again, building trust with your team, that human first approach where, yes, they're your team members and they're also humans and they have their own lives and their own challenges. So just really building a genuine relationship with them. And so over time, it's that trust and relationship building where, for me, I definitely felt imposter syndrome really strongly when I first stepped into my leadership role. But as time went on, it's really just those relationships that you build and practicing self-compassion where it kind of starts fading into the background.
Yeah. Hi, Allie. I think this is a great question, and I will share what someone told me. I was in my 7th year at working at a company. I was a director, and in theory, that means that I should feel confident and, good subject matter expert, but I kept throwing myself into these stretch roles and, learning new things. And now I was working in partnerships where I'm not only managing my own roadmap, but I'm managing someone else's. And so I had to start from the ground up and learn something. And the feedback that I got was, well, how did you learn anything in life, right? How did you learn biology or something that had nothing to do with, what you were studying? And I was like, I put in a lot of time and effort. And she said, great, do that, right? Put in as much time and effort as it takes for you to feel that, comfort, right? Because I think that the thinking and the feeling kind of come together. Jessica is spot on. You should be kind to yourself. You should, give yourself a break and not expect you to know everything about everything at all hours of the day, which we often do. But, in order to get to that point, you have to know something, right? So how do you learn things for yourself? No different, right? No different than when we were in preschool and, we're learning how to draw a straight line or anything else.
I mean, Jessica and Claudia are right on. I mean, with the research on imposter syndrome, it's also sometimes called identity interference, but growth mindset, building your self-efficacy, and that can be through taking on incrementally more difficult challenges so that you work hard and learn and become better and better and start to build that confidence, or even vicariously learning through other people through observation. So, I mean, they hit on the research there. I don't really need to add much on, but just saying they hit it on the nose and what the research says.
All right, our last question will come from Scott Torrey. He's curious if COVID and, of course, the pivot to more remote work has changed the dynamic at all. He recognizes that there are less opportunities for boys' clubs to form when life is remote and less in person. Perhaps it's too early to tell. What are your thoughts there?
I have seen instances of it actually get more difficult, and I'll tell you why. Because, once upon a time, you could grab someone and, the person sitting next to them and grab a conference room or go for a walk, right? And you kind of knew who was working on a project or who you could get information from, and, it was very instant. Now that still happens, but, people are slacking each other or picking up the phone. And, if you have a superior male manager someone's going to pick up the phone and call them instead of, you know, calling you because you're on the ground or whatever it might be, right? You're the subject matter expert, and they're like, well, no, I need, you know, this more senior opinion. And so I've actually seen it be not easier, but just as easy to, you know, kind of bypass the person, you know, potentially working on a project or whatever it is, and, you know, go to who is perceived to be the quote unquote more senior leader. I actually had an experience where a woman from a very big company, and she was my partnership counterpart, said, well, you're obviously not the decision maker here, so could you tell me who that is? And I was like, it's me. Sorry to break it to you. I'm, you know, sorry if I don't fit that mold, but it's me. So if you need something, you know, you're going to keep calling me. Oh, well, surely you're not going to be the one, you know, signing the who's actually going to sign, you know, the contract. And so it was mind boggling to have this very real back and forth. But I think that's, you know, one of the negative examples of, you know, how easy remote work has made it to, you know, kind of bypass